Hello there, quizzers. Here we go with another study. This on fulfillment once again, on our continuing theme in Matthew, this time Matthew chapter 14, the fulfillment of our next Isaiah chapter. Now, before we get to chapter 14, we have a large interlude of numerous parables, an interlude of supposedly 8 parables from Jesus in chapter 13, with a sharp rebuke or two of his hearers included, a sharp rebuke to those in his hometown of Nazareth even, with one of those not so subtle rebukes coming from the prophet Isaiah again, and I suspect a somewhat more subtle rebuke coming from Isaiah in our present chapter. An interlude of supposed alleged 8 parables that are not included in your quizzing syllabus of this, which that chapter is not in. Parables that are mostly unique to the Gospel of Matthew. Parables which I have given you the key to the interpretation back in Luke 15. You can check out the link there for that key. A bunch of parables referring to that ominous kingdom of heaven judgment. Once again, kingdom of heaven judgment. A bunch of unique, undigested, unfinished, and interrupted parables that look a whole lot more like similes to me. Yes, similes. Note the like. Yes, omia in all those verses there. Parables that are sadly missing the punchline of my parable paradigm. Yes, indeed. France was right when he said the object of the parable was that people should repent. So parable must have been a pretty broad term at this point in time, with Matthew at any rate. A term meaning a cryptic, circuitous, hidden, or obscure saying, kind of like those ancient proverbs of Solomon that we mentioned earlier. Not too linear at times. Then we have yet even more fulfilling of the prophet Isaiah in this chapter, an implicit fulfilling that is a whole lot less obscure. Well, less obscure to this frequent freestyle swimmer at any rate. Oh, frequent freestyle swimmer, huh? Oh. Let's get into swimming mode then, shall we, quizzers? All right, swimming mode. Put on my tempo trainer. Here we go. Oh, wait. Not quite finished yet. Do-do. All right, swimming mode. To that end, we are now moving on from the voice raising of Isaiah 42 in our previous chapter 12, to an out of the water raising of Isaiah 43 in our present chapter. A chapter that was likely a very natural progression in Israel's current readings in the synagogues of the day. A reading that I was blessed to hear, yes, blessed to hear, on the daily dose of Hebrew this snowy Christmas morn. Well, that's when I started writing this anyways. Guess it's been over a week now, except their reading was probably in Greek, the language for the common man. Not a major leap in understanding of this particular passage of Matthew, not like the previous leap of logic in calling the devil a strong man at any rate. With this implicit Isaiah passage even backtracking to our very first chapter of Matthew. Backtracking to where Jesus is clearly identified as Emmanuel, with Jesus once again declaring himself as the one and only Savior. indirectly declaring himself as the Son of God, declaring that he was no strange deity or ghastly ghost, as you may read in our present chapter, but rather God himself. So in this chapter, we have yet another demonstration by the strong man, who is actually Jesus, another demonstration or three of Jesus working in conjunction with the Holy Spirit. Yeah, a very real demonstration of his uber strong power over the elements. This time, his power over the elements of bread, fish, and raging water. And as a boring addendum, his power over various sicknesses again. Yep, a demonstration of power that was now as common as mud. As the old saying goes, here's mud in your eyes, sailor. Yeah. But starting off, we have a disturbing news flash on John the Baptist. As Calvin says, details which we pretty much covered earlier. So, yeah, let's get right to the feeding of the 5,000 pericope instead, huh? Now, this was a very public feeding, despite a renewed determination of Jesus to become significantly more private and solitary. You can read in verse 13. A renewed determination in light of the recent newsflash. A determination that immediately sent him rushing somewhere near Tiberias, it seems. Rushing from somewhere near Tiberias. Yes, from where Herod had a palace and may have wasted JB there. Rushing from where John may have lost his head, huh? Rushing to a desert or a solitary place, as we read in our translation. A place somewhere south, rushing to a place somewhere south of the Bethsaida, shown on the map below. Somewhere south of here, huh? Right. But what we know now from very, very recent research is that Bethsaida was actually down here, right on the shoreline. Yes, rushing to the last lost city of the Gospels, according to a very, very recent archaeological dig. Check this out. Yes, there's Sigali for you. There's this El Araj dig that just happened the last few years. There's season 4, 2019, and we can see some pretty cool stuff there. Some very recent digging has gone on there. That was pretty cool. Now look at that. Bethsaida, question mark. Here we have the Jordan River sort of meandering through. It sort of got relocated a little bit for the past few years. And there you have Tiberias, Magdala, Capernaum, and Bethsaida right around here. Their new dig. Yes, how about that, huh? So, Bethsaida was somewhere around here. So these were digs with fantastic findings. Yes, mosaics even, and a huge lioness and stuff like that. Findings on a place where Peter and Andrew and Philip were born before moving out to the big city, before moving out west to Capernaum. Anyway, they went rushing to the far side of the lake, the sea, from around Tiberias, the far side. Boom! There you go. Rushing. No, to the far side, not just a little ways down the coast, as previously thought. Rushing to Bethsaida, if I am understanding the Gospel of Mark properly. A gospel that seems to have some inconsequential sequence issues, as France mentioned earlier with Luke. Yeah, inconsequential. Like it doesn't really matter. Perhaps as a result of not being penned by the eyewitness, the actual eyewitness in spots. So this was a mass feeding to the far east side of the Jordan River, the far east side here, rather than the commonly alleged Tabga, Tabga, excuse me, commonly alleged Tabga on the far west side of the Jordan River, halfway between Capernaum and Gennesaret. A Tabga that I was given a little souvenir of a while back, a beautiful mosaic plate of 5 loaves and 2 fishes. Beautiful plate. Yeah, beautiful. But unfortunately, that's not quite right. And we have a little blurb on the back that says, also known as Heptagion, really. The 7 Springs is situated halfway between Magdala and Capernaum on the banks of the Sea of Galilee. On the hill just above Tabga is a traditional site of the miraculous feeding of the 5,000 with 2 fish and 5 loaves of bread. In 1922, old excavations, they exposed the remains of an early Christian church with a mosaic floor upon which is depicted a bread basket bordered on each side by 2 fishes. The modern church of the multiplication of the loaves and fishes was built over this mosaic floor. Tabga, with its famous mosaic, is now a popular tourist site. The loaves and fishes sculpture is a exacting scale replica of this fine mosaic. Really. Imagine that. $60 for that plate? Oh, it is kind of pretty. It is kind of pretty. Yes, it is. And you don't look a gift horse in the mouth, right? And unfortunately, our commentators do not weigh in on this location at all. Nor do they weigh in on the profound lack of harmony here, much to Calvin's discredit, especially since his commentary is entitled The Harmony of the Gospels. For a helpful examination of the blatant lack of harmony, you can even go to Wikipedia, an encyclopedia that even made a small donation to. Yeah, but they're still going to bug you for money. If you use them a bunch, it's worth a buck. Once again, Jesus went to a more private and solitary place in order to buy him just a little more time. To buy him a little more time away from hazardous Herod, according to Carson. Time that folks like Herod Antipas, were not the least bit interested in giving Jesus. However, Jesus had far too much compassion to seek complete solitude, to completely abandon them neighborly northerners to the unfathomable depths of Hades. So he healed them, and he fed them, despite cursing Chorazin and Bethsaida a little earlier. He fed them just before the feast of Passover, a feeding of far greater import and importance, but we're not going to dwell on that just now. He fed 5,000 men. Yes, the text is pretty specific on men there. Andres. In which, in all likelihood, ended up being, 15 to 20,000 people, according to Carson, since women and children were almost certainly included in this compassionate meal. They were almost certainly included if the subsequent major feeding of our next chapter is any indication. They were almost certainly included since women and children are people too, and since a person is a person no matter how small, according to a certain Dr. Zeus. There, you got the good doctor in there too. Now, those other random numbers presented in this passage are not all that important to me. Numbers of how many loaves and how many fish and how many leftovers. Leave those numbers to mystics and philosophers, to mathematicians and tax collectors. Yeah, I'm not interested. What really matters to me is that they were all satisfied. Yeah, we're stuffed, according to R.T. France. Stuffed with that feeding. That this was not merely some mass hallucination of getting fed. A mass hallucination, even shared by those hungry infants that wouldn't know a hallucination if it bit them, Charlie. Yes? A childish mass hallucination theory that Gary Habermas has so ably debunked. Which is to say that the mass hallucination theory of Jones and Susney is pure psychological bunk. Academic bunk. By desperate unbelievers trying to shore up their tenure at some liberal university. Bunk, intended to discredit the resurrection and all other miracles for that matter. Bunk that Bertrand Russell and other illogical naturalists tried to pitch in the past. Now, even recent bunk that we've seen from some university in Florida like this. Jesus was walking on ice. Are you serious? What kind of a snowbird are you? You see, you can trick the eyes, but it's much harder to trick the stomach. The stomach does not like being tricked. As many dieters would tell you, those tricked stomachs would definitely not be coming back for seconds, as many of them certainly did. Definitely not when the feast of the Passover was now at hand. Now that was a serious feast. Lamb. And those not so satisfied stomachs out of Bethsaida, yes, not Bethesda, Bethsaida, they would not be tracking him back to Capernaum then. Even tracking him from distant Tiberias. Tracking him like a milk and cookies Santa Claus before finally finding him in Gennesaret. Yeah, little tattletale Gennesaret. But let's move on to the walking on the water part. An elemental demonstration of faith. An aqueous demonstration. Yes, aqueous demonstration of faith. That reminds me of the final stage in the Pilgrim's Progress book by John Bunyan. Except that stage happened to be the far more dangerous walking through the water to the heavenly city. A through that is clearly intended in our new Isaiah passage. Now, why Jesus sent his disciples out west ahead of them is more than a bit of a mystery. They might have thought he was going to walk the long way round the lake, as the well-fed followers of him would be more than happy to do. Crossing the problematic Jordan River at a narrow spot around, 3 kilometers north of the lake, according to Carson. Crossing that natural border into another tetrarch's territory. With Jesus supposedly picking up more disciples along the way, fickle disciples intending to make him their Eastern king. You read in John. Intending to make him an eagle of a king when their present king was just a lame duck tetrarch. Yes, he was just Philip, the cuckolded tetrarch, who lost his wife to that near western tetrarch, Antipas, Herod Antipas. So Jesus stayed behind, while the other disciples in the meantime set course to Capernaum by boat, quite happy to escape those polemic politics and power grabs, and quite happy to row about 5 kilometers west along the shoreline, hoping for a quick pit stop at Home Sweet Home, before continuing on to where they were supposed to go, before continuing on to the breadbasket of Galilee called Gennesaret. Yeah, that was a breadbasket, that one. They didn't eat bread and fish. Though it wasn't exactly a 5-kilometer row, as a rather nasty headwind came up rather suddenly, blowing them heavily east and blowing them heavily south, driving them well away from shore. No more shore hugging for them land lovers, blowing them so hard that they were still only halfway there after steadily rowing all night. Yes, only halfway to Capernaum. Halfway. Although our NIV takes the easy way out and ambiguously says a considerable distance, but actually a whole halfway, according to our Gospel of John. Yes, halfway according to John. You got to give credit where credit is due. That seasoned fisherman knew his nautical miles. And a whole halfway according to our best existing manuscripts, according to our faithful textual critic Philip Comfort, with Comfort siding with Codex Sinaiticus over and against Codex Vaticanus here, siding with a majestic Greek Bible written around 350 AD over a considerably less elaborate Greek Bible that may have been written up to 50 years earlier. It seems age is not always a sage, neither with people nor with manuscripts. Yeah, neither with people nor with manuscripts. Yet that Sinaiticus manuscript makes perfectly good sense to me, since the Jordan River should have been a fairly recognizable halfway point, even on a stormy night. Halfway. Yes, with a little break in the landmass, with Bethsaida right beside that river, and perhaps a couple of night lights out there somewhere, with the river being halfway, perhaps halfway to, where are they going? Gennesaret. That sure looks like halfway to me. Yeah. Okay. Halfway. We're a little stuck on the halfway here. Let's forward a little bit. So here we have a formidable force driving them disciples further from shore than they would have liked. An unusually treacherous night wind, call it a Catabolic Wind, if you like. A wind coming down from the hills. Which finally reminds me of what he told those grumblers in Nazareth soon after. He told them, I am the bread that came down out of heaven. Yes, that very same Catabas word that I studied in Daily Dose of Greek the other day. A coming down that they would choose to dispute. Now, if you get dumped in that lake, sometimes called a sea, you don't want to be swimming in those waves. You are going down. I've seen those waves in a recent video. Those waves will mess up the bilateral breathing of even the best of freestyle swimmers. Yeah. Not only that, but you could end up swimming all night long. The current swimming record is about 6 hours from the southernmost part of the lake to the northernmost part of the lake. As far as east and west is concerned, it's a little better than that. It's a long time. And those disciples didn't swim all that well. Hence, the Lord save me, pleading of our panicked verse 30. So, if the Sinaiticus halfway happens to be the actual case, then Jesus may have walked a whole 2.5 kilometers on the water, walking in the dark at that, and waking a few good fish along the way. Yep, a few good fish, waking those tilapia, yeah, those Peter fish that you quizzers might recall tasting a while back when we studied John 21. Unless, of course, he took a shortcut at Bethsaida. Or unless he teleported, as he may have done back in Matthew 4, right? Oh, not exactly a good walk wasted, as Mark Twain disparagingly defines golf. Not exactly wasted, since I imagine that walk gave Jesus a little solitude as well, and gave him a little more time to praise and pray, as seemed to be his passion. Ought to be the passion of ours. However, if the less elaborate Vaticanus is more the case, then the disciples only got multiple stadia away. Multiple, or sometimes called many stadia away, after rowing most of the night. They only got several multiples of 185 meters or 600 feet away from shore. Now that wouldn't be all that much of a walk for Jesus. Yet that would be a serious discredit to such well-seasoned rowers as those fishermen. Right? A serious embarrassment, since Jesus was now in the passing lane. In the passing lane, if you look closely at Mark 6, verse 48. But, of course, the question people usually ask is, how far did Peter actually walk? How far did he actually walk before the wind and the waves totally freaked him out? As if we should only have to walk that far in our personal faith. Well, he was likely well out of lifeline range, okay? Which no doubt they had. And clearly far enough to get scooped by Jesus immediately. Plenty far enough to indicate a pretty good measure of faith. Much farther than any of those other disciples ever walked on water at any rate. And that you of little faith rebuke? You of little faith rebuke? Well, it may quite well have been directed to those disciples that were still in the boat, that hadn't made that giant leap, hadn't tried to walk. Perhaps that is why John never mentions Peter and his bold stepping out in faith in his somewhat briefer account. It would greatly embarrass the self-seeking John, despite the prime opportunity for him to use his pet Son of God phrase once again. But it seems Matthew was not nearly as proud as John, and not nearly as embarrassed either, since Matthew was not as seasoned a disciple, and not as seasoned a sailor either. At that point, I wouldn't be the least surprised if Jesus then quoted Isaiah 43 directly at them, an overflowing rebuke for those disciples of little faith. And here's Isaiah 43 in our NASB translation. I have called you by name. You are mine. When you pass through the waters, I will be with you. And through the rivers, they will not overflow you. And they didn't overflow Peter either. Not at the mighty Jordan anyway. Eventually he would pass through the waters, as all men do. Yes, eventually. This is a when This is a when, not an if I heard my daily dose of Hebrew correctly. How's that for an object lesson, though? How's that for a live demonstration of faith? A live demonstration of passing through the waters like a faithful follower of Jesus, or passing on the water in this particular case. It makes me wonder if that was the primary intent of Jesus sending them off in the boat in the first place. It was so he could encourage them through the turbulent waters to come, yet to come. It wasn't just for a little solitude. Yes, it's puzzling that it would take an event like this for them to finally realize that Jesus was indeed the Son of God. Verse 33. Was indeed the Son of God. Did that old Isaiah 9:6 passage finally come to their minds? Or did the latest Isaiah passage now come to mind? Was this a flashback or what? A flashback of an earlier calming of the sea? Either way, that Son of God declaration gets brought up again. It gets brought up a couple chapters from now. It gets brought up when they're even further up north. In Caesarea Philippi, take a look at that map again if you like. Up north, further up north. Yeah, in Caesarea Philippi, named after that tetrarch. Brought up with a stark reminder of that earlier miraculous feeding or two, and a reminder of that tense little faith event again. An event that might also puzzle you, though, is that as soon as Jesus got into the boat, they were immediately where they were supposed to go. Immediately, it says in John 6:21. They were immediately in Gennesaret. Now that's traveling. Maybe, perhaps, a teleportation event long before Star Trek was even a twinkle in Gene Roddenberry's eyes. Yeah. Matthew and Mark seem to miss that point, however. It's an often overlooked point. Whereas John seems to notice another teleportation event a little later on as well. He seems to notice that other teleportation wonder in the upper room. Quite a puzzle there, huh? He notices other things as well. But to our present teleportation end, they were immediately in a fertile plain that was renowned by the contemporary historian Josephus as being wonderful in its characteristics and in its beauty. Thanks to the rich soil, there is not a plant that does not flourish there, and the inhabitants grow everything. The air is so temperate that it suits the most diverse species. Well, they hardly needed bread and fish there, did they? Sounds downright heavenly, doesn't it? And according to that recent archaeology, that place hasn't changed all that much. The land and water levels are about the same. So much for evolution. But what about the terrible burning aspect of our new Isaiah passage? Not so heavenly, huh, dear reader? Well, that burning aspect was already addressed in our skipped chapter. It was addressed in chapter 13. That burning was repeatedly addressed in verses 30, 40, 42, and 50, addressed more than enough to be fully imprinted on those disciples. No need to belabor that aspect of that Isaiah chapter. We will get more into that burning part a little later on, but for now, let's just focus on the swimming part. Yeah, let's just focus on the faith part for our present edification. Let's just focus on the paramount rule of faith as we move on swimmingly to our very next chapter, as we move on to great faith, as opposed to the little faith of those disciples that are still on the boat, still in the boat. So, as we move on, swim on, dear reader. Swim on, dear reader, swim on.